reporting exclusively that people in Baltimore and Ferguson, Missouri were targeted in at least one of the Facebook ads bought by Russians during the 2016 campaign. The ad referenced Black Lives Matter. Sources say it was meant to appear both as supporting the group, but could also be seen as portraying them as threatening to some residents.
The ad first appeared in late 2015 or early 2016 as a Russian-affiliated troll farm known as the Internet Research Agency tried to sow political chaos in the U.S. Facebook has said about a quarter of the 3,000 ads bought by the agency were geographically targeted, but Facebook did not reveal specific locations.
Facebook chief Mark Zuckerberg firing back at President Trump after this tweet, where the president accuses the social media site and other media of being, quote, anti-Trump. In a Facebook post, Zuckerberg said, Trump says Facebook is against him. Liberals say we help Trump. Both sides are upset about ideas and content they don't like. That's what running a platform for all ideas looks like. Zuckerberg also expressing regret for his comment after the election that it was crazy to suggest misinformation on Facebook changed the outcome of the election. Attorneys for legendary coach Rick Pitino say the Hall of Fame basketball coach plans to fight for his job after the University of Louisville effectively fired him. Pitino placed on indefinite, unpaid administrative leave after his basketball program was targeted in a federal investigation into fraud and corruption in college recruiting. On Tuesday, 10 men, including a top Adidas executive and 4 college assistant coaches, were charged with bribing young athletes to influence their choices in schools, shoe sponsorships, and agents. Pitino's lawyers say he did nothing wrong, calling his apparent firing a, quote, regrettable rush to judgment.
Wow.
Story's not over. This is a legendary coach, won titles at 2 schools, but his career has been littered with infractions and scandal. Can't imagine he survives this one.
All right, the president focusing on a topic familiar to him, taxes.
This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity, and I guess it's probably something I could say that I'm very good at. Our framework includes our explicit commitment that tax reform will protect low-income and middle-income households, not the wealthy and well-connected.
Now, some disagree with that, claiming this plan, it does favor business and it favors the rich, but most Americans will get tax cuts. This is tax reform. And this is lower taxes for just about everybody. Still, this is simply a blueprint, omitting critical details that the tax writers on the tax writing committee, it'll be their job to fill that in. That could take months or longer. But here's what we know. For business, tax cuts, the corporate rate slashed to 20%, pass-through income cut to 25%. For individuals, a simpler tax code. The 7 tax brackets collapsed down to 3. Now, we don't know the income ranges yet. Again, the tax writers will have to decide that. But it cuts the top tax rate to 35%. It allows lawmakers to add a 4th tax bracket above 35% if they decide that's necessary. You know, and Trump has said he is open to raising taxes on the rich. The lowest rate is actually 2 percentage points higher. But the White House says most low-income earners won't pay taxes. That's because the plan doubles the standard deduction, meaning it won't tax the first $12,000 of income for individuals and $24,000 for couples. How can the plan double that deduction? By eliminating personal exemptions, along with most tax breaks. Only 2 tax breaks look like they're safe here: the mortgage interest deduction and the charitable deduction. And it boosts the child tax credit. But student loan interest, medical expenses, state and local taxes, all of those write-offs are now gone. The last one will hurt people in high tax and mostly blue states. That will draw criticism, as will eliminating the estate tax and the alternative minimum tax. Both of those help rich people. Also a concern, the plan doesn't say how it will pay for all these cuts. About $5.8 trillion over the next 10 years. Killing tax loopholes will help. That will only raise, Dave, $3.6 trillion, leaving a $2.2 trillion deficit. So that's the framework. And then the politics gets all nutty after that, where they do the horse trading to figure out what stays, what goes. The president had said he wanted a 15% corporate tax rate. It looks like that Republican White House plan doesn't quite go that far. But this is tax reform. I had been concerned that they wouldn't do
cuts.
Yeah, this is tax reform.
Still a lot of questions in terms of where they put the income on those 3 brackets, the child tax credit. But all right, let's start with the middle class miracle. How's the middle class better
Well,
off?
the Trump says it's going to be a middle class miracle, that he's going to lower that tax rate to 25%. That's what he says he's going to do for that middle tax bracket. And he also says that you're going to be able to do this on a postcard. The simplification of this, I think, is what is going to be pretty it's going to change the industry of doing taxes, by the way, too, but making it much
tax professionals.
Yeah, much simpler for people to do this and understand where their taxes are going. The child credit, the child tax credit there, interesting. That's
undefined, right?
Undefined. Look, a lot of this is still undefined. That's because we're told that's on purpose. That's not because they're trying to use subterfuge. We're told that's on purpose so that there's room to negotiate. There are a lot of different opinions and a lot of different constituencies in tax reform. So that's on purpose. We don't have some of those details.
All right, Newt Gingrich tweeting, this will be the deepest tax cut for small business in 80 years. True or false?
I would say that's true. I mean, businesses really, really want tax reform. Now, look, what I've heard, some of the arguments I heard was big companies are probably only paying 17 to 19% tax rate anyway, right? So,
but small business.
But why is this better? Why is this better for them? It's better for them because they spend so much money on tax, exploiting tax loopholes, on building their business so that they can try to lower their taxes. They want a territorial tax system around the world. They'll get that under this plan. They want to be able to bring the money back that they have sitting overseas for a one-time lower tax rate. They'll be able to get that in this plan. So this is, I would agree with the president that this is once in a generation tax reform if they get it.
And look, dynamic scoring is something that will be debated for weeks, years, and decades perhaps. Can they pay for this with growth?
And that's the question. The tax cuts over the last 20 years or so have not really spurred huge growth. So is this going to be different? Is this going to help juice what has been a weak economic recovery? The White House and many economists hope it will. Some skeptics are saying, maybe not. Those Bush tax cuts, we had Bush tax cuts, we had tax cuts in stimulus under the Obama administration. You still had very a slow economy. So,
all right, many more questions for you in the next couple of hours here. Meanwhile, if Congress can't overhaul Obamacare, it looks like President Trump is prepared to go it alone. The president revealing a plan he believes will bring immediate relief to millions of Americans who can no longer afford skyrocketing health care premiums.
And I'll probably be signing a very major executive order where people can go out, cross state lines, do lots of things, and buy their own health care. And that will be probably signed next week. It's being finished now.
Ironically, it is Senator Rand Paul who has been pushing the idea of allowing insurers to sell policies in other states. The same Rand Paul who helped scuttle the Graham-Cassidy bill. If the president signs the order, insurers would be allowed to sell policies in multiple states, but they would only have to adhere to the regulations of their home state.
President Trump has no immediate plans to fire his Secretary of Health and Human Services, despite the uproar over Tom Price's use of private planes. The president, though, making it clear he's not pleased, says he's awaiting more information before making a final decision on Price's future. The embattled health secretary offering up an apology to the president for the unnecessary distraction, but not his resignation.
A spokesman at HHS says Price is taking the criticism very seriously and to heart. CNN has also learned EPA Chief Scott Pruitt used private planes for government business this summer instead of flying commercial. We're told the EPA's general counsel approved the flights, citing logistics.
It's kind of that stay tuned mentality on Price that we've heard before with Steve Bannon and others. Ahead, tons of aid for Puerto Rico left sitting at the port of San Juan. Why help can't get to those who need it most. Next.
Atomic Lantern and Atomic Beam USA, the best-selling tactical flashlight. It's ultra bright and withstands the toughest punishment. Just pay.
Lead, we learned new hard evidence today that Russia continues to meddle in U.S. politics, not just in the 2016 presidential election, but as we speak, in political debates dominating the airwaves and your social media feed. Here is Republican Senator James Lankford today during a hearing on threats to the homeland.
We watched even this weekend the Russians and their troll farms and their internet folks start hashtagging out take a knee and also hashtagging out boycott NFL. They were taking both sides of the argument this past weekend and pushing them out from their troll farms as much as they could to try to just raise the noise level in America.
We should note that even President Trump retweeted a post with that boycott NFL hashtag this over the weekend. Senator Langford warned that Russian bots and troll farms, these are not science fiction characters, these are very real, are fueling divisiveness across the country and will do that and more, again, with upcoming elections in 2018 and 2020. CNN's Jessica Schneider joins me now. Jessica, really a sobering statement at this hearing there, making it very clear that this kind of interference with the U.S. political process is continuing, coming from Russia.
It's ongoing. It was sobering. It was really eye-opening as well. You know, Senator Langford pointing out that the Russians aren't just working to influence U.S. elections, but also the everyday discourse of the American public. Senator Langford talked about how Russian trolls are flooding still social media with hashtags now related to the NFL national anthem debate, working to raise, as he puts it, quote, the noise level. So, of course, a lot of people turn to social media to educate themselves on issues. But the senator today warning, be aware out there what you see and read, since it may actually be the Russian propaganda machine at work on your computer.
No question. I mean, we all have to be smarter about this. The new FBI director, Christopher Wray, who replaced James Comey, of course, he also testified today. I mean, did he detail what's being done to prevent this kind of attack, particularly with the next election cycle coming so soon?
Right. He said it's a full-scale effort by the FBI. Of course, this was the first time that Christopher Wray testified before Congress as FBI director. He does say that his agents are closely monitoring Russian election meddling efforts, not just here in the U.S., but all over the world, and they're sharing information with other countries, devoting vast resources to protecting the integrity of our future elections.
We're spending an enormous amount of time talking about this very subject. We are surging and more resources specifically focused on the upcoming elections. We are collecting more intelligence. We're also in the FBI looking at this as a multidisciplinary effort, not just across agencies, but even within the FBI multidisciplinary. So our counterintelligence and our cyber people are working together on it.
So FBI Director Wray not giving the numbers, but saying that the FBI is committing, as he put it, to surging more resources toward this effort.
I know the DHS Acting Secretary Elaine Duke also talked about this, particularly as it relates to states, because it's the states who run the election, and oftentimes they've been protective about the process, turning down even federal help. I mean, is she saying that that's changing at all?
Well, she said that they're working with the states. So, of course, we've heard that officials have, in fact, said as many as 21 states were potentially targeted with election system scanning attempts by Russian government-linked cyber actors in that past election cycle. So now Acting Secretary Duke, she says that DHS is ready to go on site in any state that needs assistance safeguarding its voting systems. But, you know, Jim, she did say, of course, like you said, that she's still sensing a bit of pushback from the states because they don't necessarily want the federal government involved in their local or state election process. Sadly,
even if they need it, right?
Exactly.
Jessica Schneider, thanks very much. Joining me now is Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois. He serves on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman Kinzinger, also a veteran of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Thanks very much for being here. You hear this, and this is a warning we hear often, not just from DHS, from the FBI. We hear it from the intelligence committees, Senate, and the Hill. Russia is still attacking. They're still seeking to get into our political process. What's being done to stop this kind of influence? I mean, we're just about a year away from the midterm elections in 2018.
More needs to be done. That's what needs to be done. I mean, exposing this is the first thing. So as your reporter had mentioned, you know, being aware of, and as Senator Langford mentioned, being aware of using both sides of the NFL debate hashtags to try to create dissension, knowing that if you log on to Facebook or a social media account and you see a article that seems crazy, it probably is. It could be one of these real fake news things we see. So I think understanding that they're doing this is one. Number two, obviously election security is essential, making sure they're not hacking the voter rolls and finding out what's going on, and ultimately, God forbid, ever hacking vote totals. There's been no accusation of that yet. And then the other thing is I think we have to be on offense against the Russians as well. Whether that's in Eastern Europe, they're doing the same thing all through Europe. We need to be involved with our own Global Engagement Center, which we have funded in the House of Representatives, to try to push back against this Russian influence, because there's nothing Vladimir Putin fears more than losing his own election. And so I think we need to talk about fighting fire with fire here to some extent as well.
Is it difficult for the U.S. to respond as aggressively as necessary when the president himself questions the intelligence which has found that Russia did interfere in the election process and continues to interfere in the political process?
Well, it's obviously not helpful, and I think it's counter to the narrative we need. I think this would be very beneficial to the president to say, look, it's obvious when what we saw with these Facebook ads, there were ads promoting Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, other people, and it was all about creating political debate and dissension and anger. And I think recognizing that is not questioning the legitimacy of the president's election, but it is saying they're going to try this in 2018, and in 2020, I guarantee the Russians are going to try this against President Trump because they're not going to like him. But they're doing this to tear apart a free and open society. They're exploiting the very advantage we have, which is something that, by the way, Vladimir Putin doesn't give them, which is the ability to express ourselves free and openly with whatever opinion. And so they're going to exploit that, and we have to be aware of it. And, you know, obviously it would be beneficial if the president was on front with that.
Let me ask you this. Russia did not interfere with voting systems in 2016, vote counts, etc. But I've spoken to members of both Republican and Democrat of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees who say that they would not put it past Russia to do that the next time around, in 2018, in 2020. Is that a concern of yours as well, that Russia might the next time try to interfere with actual vote counting?
Oh, 100%. You look at the breaches that happen, whether it's with a credit reporting agency or breaches that happen in medical records, anything like that, they can enter these systems. They could put something downrange into these voting machines that somehow is going to end up in the production process that would give them control over them. I'm not a tech expert, but I know that's a huge concern. And the biggest thing, again, the Russians, they don't necessarily care who wins. The biggest thing they want to do, the thing that underpins our hope in democracy and the institution, whether it's of Congress or the White House, is the fact that we can vote and have our vote heard. If they can undermine that and make people think that their vote didn't count in a massive scale or that they affected outcomes, that would be the biggest threat to undermining democracy.
The situation on the Korean Peninsula is escalating. You have the leaders of America and North Korea trading threats, frankly, of war. You met with the South Korean foreign minister yesterday, I understand. Is the U.S., are the U.S. and North Korea close to or in danger of a military conflict?
I think we're in danger of it. I don't think we're close. I think right now we're giving economic sanctions time to work. I think reducing the amount of oil obviously going in, bringing the Chinese online, 85% of any trade goes over that Chinese border. They can shut it down. I think we're stepping up the pressure. We have to be clear, though, that there is a military option, because also knowing that can make diplomacy against an adversary all the more stronger. So I don't think people need to lose sleep tonight, but understand the North Koreans are progressing very fast, and they're marrying technology, nuclear technology, to a threat to do it. Talk about sinking Japan, Guam, and the United States, and then test, which actually put them in that range of it. So it's a very dangerous situation, but I think the national security structure of the United States and South Korea are very apt to handle this.
Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger, thanks very much.
Yeah, you bet, anytime.
The whistle blown on a college sports legend. University of Louisville's Rick Pitino is out in the wake of a corruption scandal unearthed by the FBI.
Whether it's new,
they do not, in fact, have the votes. He also had words for Puerto Rico, saying that the U.S. will be with Puerto Rico every step of the way. It will be with the island until, he says, this job is done. My political panel is here with me now. I want to start with you, if I can. Bill Kristol, you listened to that tax plan. You have the outlines there. I mean, really just the broadest of outlines. Do you hear something there that could make it through, make it to reality?
Yes. I mean, I hear parts of that plan could make it through. I don't know that they need to make it through. I think everyone has the Republicans, certainly for Republicans, this is the, what's the word I'm looking for, the magic thing at the end of the rainbow, you know. It's Obamacare repeal, huge disappointment. Lots of other things haven't happened. Taxes, that's what Republicans, Bob Novak, the late Bob Novak used to say Republicans were put on earth to cut taxes. And I think a lot of Republican members believe that. But at the risk of increasing the deficit, at the risk of rewarding wealthy people more than poor people, at the risk of rewarding capital.
Not at the risk. I mean, these numbers, they increase the deficit. There's no evidence that this is paid
certainly for. Wealth, there's some distributional questions. I would say also this, that, I mean, economists, I talked to a couple today, and one of the big things of the last 20 years, under both presidents of both parties, capital has done well, labor has not. Working class people, at best, kind of steady wages. People who own stocks and real estate and stuff done pretty well. This tax plan, if you look at it quickly, pretty good for stocks and real estate, not that much for working class families.
Jan Palmieri, you heard the president there claim in his comments that numerous Democrats, in his words, will come on board for this tax plan. Do you see evidence? Do you see elements in here that they would come on board for?
I don't see elements that they would come on board with the plan that they laid out today. And I just have a really hard time imagining anything that can get 218 votes and the requisite votes needed in the Senate. I mean, yes, you could try to do a Chuck and Nancy play where you have a center-left package, but why Speaker Ryan and Mitch McConnell will bring that to the floor, I don't know. So these guys tried health care 3 times. They couldn't get it done. I think they're going to have a very hard time getting any package done. And if you can't get a package to the point where it's going to the floor and it's a real, and there's something concrete for people to look at and analyze, you're not going to be able to pressure Democrats to join you.
Peter Marisi, we're joined by an economist at the University of Maryland. As you look at this, just in the simplest terms, do the numbers add up?
Well, we don't know what the numbers are because they haven't told us where the various tax brackets cut off and things of that nature. All we've been told is they have a $1.5 trillion budget over 10 years. From that, if doing some reasonable economics and being somewhat optimistic, you figure it's going to increase the deficit in total by $1 trillion. There'll be some growth, but they'll still be down by about $1 trillion. It will make the tax system much simpler for most ordinary people. Remember, there are 2 issues here, not just how much tax people pay, but what a terrible headache April 15th has become. This will relieve that headache for most people. Another thing to consider is that the top 25% already pay, according to the IRS, about 87% of the taxes. So it's kind of impossible to have a tax cut that doesn't help the top quarter of the population more than the rest. And we do have a tax system that basically taxes capital. I know they've been doing well, but taxes capital more here than it is taxed in Europe and Japan. And that is one of the reasons that companies are leaving. This will help somewhat, but we have to unpack it. How are they going to pay for it all on the corporate side? They're going to take away a lot of exemptions and deductions. The corporate rate is right now 35%, but the effective rate is about 18%, near as I can tell. Abroad, it's about 12%. So, putting $75 billion into that is going to reduce that 18 a bit, but there's going to be some companies that are going to pay more taxes out of this thing, even though there are a lot that'll pay less.
Right. Crystal, you heard that there. One, increasing the deficit by $1 trillion. That's not an insignificant number, but it's a frequent talking point. You heard it from Peter Marisi there. You'll hear it from many Republicans that, the wealthy pay the vast majority of the taxes, therefore they get the vast majority of the cuts, in effect. But as you look at this plan, are those cuts imbalanced, favoring the wealthy over the working class?
If you have a plan that increases the deficit by $1 trillion, I find it extremely difficult to imagine that the hawkish Republican, but deficit hawks within the Republican Party, House and Senate, but let's just talk about the House.
The freedom
I just don't know that they're going to go for that.
Tax cuts,
no, right? That does it does balance, but $1 trillion. I can just hear I feel like these debates. If you stay around Washington long enough, you hear them all come back around at you. We are bankrupting our grandchildren. Like that whole line will come back around. Bill is right. You saw Trump say this in the beginning of the speech. I've been waiting a long time to talk about this. I mean, this is the thing that drives the Republican Party. Healthcare, Obamacare certainly energized them, but healthcare broadly, no. Tax cuts, yes. I just think it's very hard to get 218 Republicans to vote for anything. Ask John Boehner that. Ask Paul Ryan that. Again, the devil is in the details. They laid out the tax brackets, but not where the financial breaks would be, which does matter. How are you going to try to pay for these things? Some of the details he left to Congress. I think that gives them some agency. I just hear the ads in my head, the TV ads, like they added $1 trillion to the deficit, and that's
to help rich people,
right? And that's a tough thing to get.
Peter said correctly that the wealthy pay the huge bulk of income taxes. One thing that's interesting is that, and I can't really see why Democrats don't talk more about this. There is this kind of big tax that is not progressive and that is paid by every working American. It's called a payroll tax. We all see it on our thing there. I think it's what, 13.3% employers. It's a big tax. Neither party, incidentally, has any interest in cutting that, even though working families are hurting. I think if I were a moderate Democrat or something, I would say this is all unnecessary. Corporations have plenty of capital. Let's cut the payroll tax.
The quickest and easiest way to get cash into the pockets, the broadest spectrum of Americans. Let's hold the thought for a moment on the tax plan, because it was quite an aggressive comment, you might say, by the president, saying that he has the votes for the health care repeal, the Obamacare repeal, in light of the fact that the Republican leadership, in fact, one of the sponsors, both of the sponsors of Graham Cassidy, said they do not have the votes. CNN's Jim Acosta is traveling with the president today in Indianapolis. He joins me now live. Jim, what was your reaction there as you heard the president make that claim that he has votes that everyone else says he doesn't have?
Yeah, Jim, you said it was an aggressive comment that the president made when he said he has the votes on Graham Cassidy. I guess you would say it was an aggressively dishonest comment. The fact is, by our whip count, looking at the votes for all of this, they don't have the votes to pass Graham Cassidy at this point. You heard the president during these remarks here at the top of this event make reference to Senator John McCain, Senator Lisa Murkowski, who both say they are not going to support this legislation. He didn't really want to call them out by name. He also referred to a senator who is ailing at home right now, although earlier in the day, we should point out, the president said that the senator was ailing in the hospital. That's simply not the case. That's in reference to Mississippi Senator Thad Cochran, who put out a tweet earlier today saying he appreciated all the well wishes, but that he is recuperating at home from a health issue. I mean, Jim, we should just point out that was just flat untrue. The president, the Republicans, they don't have the votes right now to pass Graham Cassidy. In fact, Lindsey Graham himself, one of the main co-sponsors of the legislation, put out a statement saying we certainly don't have the votes. But that was hardly the only comment that stands out at this event, Jim. At one point, the president said, well, this tax plan doesn't really work for me. It doesn't really help people like me. Jim, we simply don't know whether or not that's true because the president, as you know, as we all know, refuses to release his tax returns. And just to add to that, there was one point during this event where the president said, well, as I look out in this crowd, I see a lot of red hats. Jim, I only counted 3. Like it is the case when you're doing your taxes, listening to the president today, certainly could use some careful accounting. The president certainly does not have the votes, and he has not released his tax returns. We don't know whether this tax plan would help him or not. Jim?
Right, and sometimes the facts stand in the way. Jim Acosta with the president there. We don't know what the president's tax returns show because he hasn't released them. We do know that one element of this plan would very certainly help the president and his family, and that is the elimination of what the Republicans will call the death tax, the estate tax, which affects, we should note, 1/5 of 1% of all estates. That's 1 in 500 people that are actually affected by this in practice. A tiny sliver, although that generates some $17 billion a year in revenue. It's a significant revenue earner. How much of an issue is that, Chris Cillizza, as you look at this? I mean, Peter, I hear you there, but let's go to Chris if we can first. For the president politically, he's pushing a tax plan, and yet he has not shown the American people how it will affect him personally.
It should be a really big issue. It won't be because the people who are for Trump are going to like this plan, and the people who are against Trump will say he hasn't released his tax returns, which, I mean, I think is a very valid point. He's, just to repeat, sound like a broken clock, but he is the only major presidential candidate in modern history to not release his tax returns. He is certainly the only president in modern history to not release his tax returns. So we don't know. My guess is the country is so polarized it won't matter. Can I just say one thing about the health care thing? Jim Acosta gets it right. This makes no sense. He's not talking about anything that Thad Cochran's vote, which is what he's talking about, that's the 47th vote for this. There are 3 senators against this: Rand Paul, John McCain, and Susan Collins. If you subtract 52 from 3, you get 49. It doesn't matter. So I don't know what he's talking about. I feel like we have gotten ourselves inoculated because he says so many things, frankly, that are just provably false. We've gotten ourselves inoculated here, but you can't He's the president of the United States. He's essentially saying we have the votes. If they had the votes, they would vote. So I think, yes, that wasn't the focus of the speech, but it is an important thing. What he is saying is not true.
Well, the other thing that what he said that's not true, but the other thing that he admitted is it is not happening this year. He said we're coming back next year to do this. And you know what's not happening in an election year? Repealing Obamacare. Right? So it is done. It is now done until at least after 18.
You mentioned the health care debate, and there was a remarkably troubling story reported by Axios that in private, President Trump has physically mocked McConnell, but also John McCain, in particular, imitating McCain's thumb down during the health care vote. John McCain, as we know, is facing a life-threatening disease now. He's going to cancer treatment every day. I just want to perhaps I got to begin with you, Bill. What's your reaction to that when the President of the United States takes aim, in effect, in personal and you might even say odious terms against a sitting American senator?
Well, I'm not surprised. I mean, he said things in the campaign that were as odious about senators and about others. So, I mean, that's his, and he says in private, maybe he was good-naturedly imitating McCain's thumbs down. I don't know. I think McCain has taken suffered worse things in his life and will not care much about it. But I do think more generally, I mean, look, getting attacked, leave it aside Obamacare, that had its own problems, getting the repeal of that too. Tax bills are very complicated. I mean, presidential leadership and leaders of Congress making bargains, they need Democrats ultimately on this, I think, getting Democrats on board. It's something that you don't really want to gratuitously insult a bunch of senators or congressmen, members of your own party or of the other party. When you're looking at a major legislative proposal that's going to go through lots of changes, there's going to be moving parts, and that's the other question. Who in this White House, I watched from afar as Jim Baker, Dick Darman, David Stockman, sort of ran the 81 tax cut, and then in 86, Bush, Obama, they had Josh Bolton, Rahm Emanuel, people who knew a lot, Peter Orszag, about how these things work. I don't really know, honestly. I mean, maybe McConnell and Ryan can make this work. Well, but they haven't shown much ability so far.
Listen, eventually you have to get to the hard numbers because it's not going to pass until you get to those hard numbers. The comments about having the votes on health care, which is clearly not true based on our own reporting, but public comments from Republicans, really the second time today that the president misled, because earlier today he deleted tweets where he had publicly said that his support in the Alabama Senate race has made a difference. He deleted those tweets today. But we want to ask you now about that loss, in effect, for Donald Trump. He put his support on the line, his political capital on the line. Do you think that's a significant setback for the president?
Yeah, but other deleting tweets, is anyone else not amazed by that in the sense? He has left up truly offensive tweets about other individuals, birther tweets about the his predecessors, President of the United States. Those he didn't delete, and I don't know that he should have deleted them because maybe you should just leave them up. He said them, right? The one thing he can't stand is the notion that his guy lost. That he tweeted yesterday, Luther Strange is coming up in the polls and he's going to win, vote for him. He lost, and that's the one thing Trump is most.
And our reporting, I should say, our reporting is it was a very angry president last night and this morning, venting at staff, venting at the Republican leadership, who, in his view, Jen Palmieri, they had, if not promised him the win, led him to believe that Strange could beat Moore in this race.
Yeah, and I thought that there's a way for him to make this work either way, right? If Strange had won, great, and if Strange didn't win, it's like, okay, Moore is more in my camp. McConnell got to go my way, but that's not his reaction. His reaction was to lash out. And I think we saw, when he went to the helicopter today, he talked about Tom Price using private jets, the HHS secretary, and criticizing for him that. That seemed to me to be a reaction to Alabama. That seemed to me to be a reaction, the kind of thing that Steve Bannon would say you got to do, because that's a drain the swamp kind of issue. So I think we see reverberations elsewhere.
Chris Leary, final thought.
I think there's a through line between his just fatuous comments about healthcare and what he is, the deletion of tweets, which is Bill makes it. He can't deal with losing. There's no question that on Graham Cassidy, they couldn't bring it to the floor. The reason, FY, if you're watching out there, the reason they didn't bring it to the floor is because they don't have 50 votes. The second they had 50 votes, they would bring it to the floor. Luther Strange lost by more than a larger percentage than he had lost in the primary. Donald Trump promised that he would win and that he was making a lot of progress. He cannot wrap his mind around losing, so he tells himself and his supporters a story about these things. It's just not true.
Chris, Bill, Jen, thanks very much. As always, a week of misery. Things only seem to be getting worse, much worse in Puerto Rico. Half of the island's population does not have running water. Almost all of the island is still without power. And officials on the ground say that there is simply not enough aid. When will things start getting better?
The Lead with Jake Tapper, brought to you by Acura.
Welcome back. You're watching CNN. I'm Brooke Baldwin. You very well may know retired NASA astronaut Leland Melvin from the photo taken of him with his dogs. This is a social media favorite. Here it is. But now the astronaut, who is also a former NFL player, is calling out President Trump for his attacks on athletes who protest during the national anthem. And so he wrote this open letter to the president, and it ends with this. He writes, "Donald Trump, please know that you are supposed to be a unifier and a compassionate and empathetic leader. If you can't do the job, then please step down and let someone else try. I pray that you do the right thing. May God bless you." Well, moments ago, the president continued his attack on the NFL, mocking the league's TV ratings.
I think the NFL is in a box. I think they're in a really bad box. The thing that's doing well in the NFL is the pregame, because everybody wants to see what's going on. The NFL is in a very bad box. You cannot have people disrespecting our national anthem, our flag, our country, and that's what they're doing. And in my opinion, the NFL has to change. Or you know what's going to happen? Their business is going to go to hell.
I have Leland Melvin with me now. He's the author of Chasing Space, an astronaut's story of grit, grace, and second chances. It is such an honor to have you here, and thank you so much for everything you've done for this country, way up above. But let's talk about the president and all of this. And first, I'd love to just get your response to what the president said, moments ago at the White House. The NFL has to change, and their business to hell.
From SOB to going to Hades, we have to stop this language against people, because it's not unifying the country, it's tearing us apart. And from you see no borders. You see people working together that we used to fight against the Russians and the Germans, and we're now working together, breaking bread. So, Mr. President, please tone it down. The Constitution allows us to do these things. It allows us to pray and protest and have freedom of religion and petition. Let's do the things that the Constitution says. Veterans say that the flag, it's a symbol, but it's not the thing that we have to, divide us with.
You talk a lot about language in this letter to the president, and you, sir, are a proud Wahoo. You graduated UVA, Wahoo grad school, and so it was just really personal for you to see what was happening in Charlottesville some weeks ago. And you talk about the president's language in the wake of Charlottesville and the Nazis coming to town on your precious grounds, and how the president responded to that, talking about hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides and blame on both sides. And yet there he was a couple nights ago in Alabama calling Kaepernick an SOB. And you contrast the two. What's your point on that?
I mean, if you can call a black man who's protesting peacefully an SOB, but a Nazi who has guns armed to the teeth to make America white again, and you can't call them something similar. I mean, there's a major difference here, and there's a problem here. And so if people look like me, I think, okay, I'm an SOB, but this Nazi they're good people. They're good people on both sides. And so I was troubled with that, and it made me want to write this because I was so troubled.
My next question, I guess, is more big picture, because you look at everyone who took a knee on Sunday, and then some teams on Monday stood, linked arms. It's Green Bay asking their fans tomorrow night, to lock arms during the national anthem. Where do we go from here? What is the point of all of this? What's the message?
The message is, our Constitution protects us and allows us to honor the flag and honor the country the way that we want to. It's a freedom of speech. And so let's not get so small-minded in this divisive language to keep people from coming together. From space, you don't have that. We work together. And let's just tone down the rhetoric, too, because that's inflaming and incensing people and getting them spun up, And we got to stop this.
You talk about honoring the flag and patriotism, and I've seen, I look at the picture of you on the cover of your book. And what's on your left arm?
I have a flag.
But the stars and stripes on the space shuttle as well. I mean, you, sir, know what it means to be a patriotic American. The president says, you know, these players are being disgraceful and that this is all about the flag and patriotism. What does it mean to you to be patriotic?
It means that you honor the founding documents and the language that we use to allow people to have these freedoms. And the flag is a symbol. We have many symbols of our patriotism. We have people that go into battle and fight and work and save lives. We have firemen. We have police officers. We have football players that are giving their all on Sunday to play and you know, but they're not allowed to do their constitutional rights, and they want to get fired and they go to hell and they SOBs. This is beyond the pale. Mr. President, please stop, please.
Lulu and Melvin, thank you so much, and thank you for one of these as well.
You're welcome.
Pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, Brooke.
Thank you. Just a couple hours from now, Anderson Cooper will be hosting a town hall about this national anthem controversy. Patriotism, the players, the president, airs tonight here on CNN, 9 o'clock. Please don't miss this very important conversation. We are, meantime, minutes away from President Trump taking the podium there in Indianapolis to roll out his plan for a major overhaul of the tax system. We'll explain what it would mean for you, your taxes, and your money. Stay here.
The untold story of a CIA double agent who betrayed his...
All right, we continue on. You're watching CNN. I'm Brooke Baldwin. Just watching the clock here. We're minutes away from the president making a major speech in Indianapolis to sell his plan on tax reform. So we'll take it live and listen in very closely. But moments ago, the president gave an impromptu news conference to reporters before boarding his plane, covering everything from the NFL to the crisis in Puerto Rico to health care. And on that topic, he said he's not giving up and he could be ready to make a deal with Democrats.
Health care, we have it. We have the votes. Because of reconciliation, we have to wait till January, February, or March, which we'll do. But in the meantime, I will negotiate with Democrats to see if we can make a bipartisan bill.
The president also weighed in on the primary defeat of the Alabama Senate candidate that he supported, Luther Strange, the man the president backed. On the left here, your screen, lost to the man on the right, Roy Moore.
Well, we have a man who's going to be a met him. I never spoke to him. I'm very happy with him. And I have to say, Luther came a long way from the time I endorsed him, and he ran a good race. But Roy ran a really great race.
Now, those comments come as a new Quinnipiac University poll shows only 36% of the country approves of the job the president is doing. That same poll found the majority. You see there, 56% do not believe Trump is fit to serve as president. Let's go to Gloria Borger, our CNN chief political analyst. So we saw the numbers. Let's just, let's starting with these polls. It's an interesting number given the week he's having.
Not less than it was.
They fit the plan to you. I have everything I want with Consumer Cellular. Their customer